Having said those, I see we have two witnesses who apparently don't have COVID. That's a good start. And we have Benoit Dupont, who is Sherry Henderson, Assistant Director of Requirements for CSIS, and Mr. Sami Khoury, Head of Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Mr. Khoury, I am intensely jealous of that tie. That is a beautiful tie. I'm sure there's a story behind it. So. With that, I'll call on Ms. Henderson for her 5-minute opening statement.
Okay. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm Sheree Henderson, the Assistant Director of Requirements at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you once again this year, this time to discuss cybersecurity, which of course is a very important topic. As Canada's principal government agency responsible for investigating threats to the security of Canada, CSIS also investigates cyber threats. As such, we employ all our investigative tools to collect intelligence on cyber threat actors' exploitation of cyberspace to conduct espionage, sabotage, and foreign-influenced activities against Canada and Canadians. CSIS also cooperates with a wide range of domestic and international partners. Our unique value lies in our ability to collect intelligence on the nature and scope of hostile cyber activities and the intentions of the actors behind them. This intelligence supports the mandates of our Government of Canada partners, enabling them to better formulate foreign and domestic policies, protect critical Canadian entities, and strengthen our nation's overall cybersecurity posture. Under the CSIS Act, the service also has the legal authority to use threat reduction measures in order to reduce cyber threats to Canada. One of the most important challenges to address in protecting our national security is the sharing of timely and actionable intelligence. CSIS is addressing this particular challenge in a number of ways, including through regular outreach and partner engagement. We have delivered briefings to partners on the espionage and foreign influence threats posed by state cyber actors, as well as the potential national security impacts of ransomware attacks carried out by criminal groups. With today's rapidly evolving technology, we are witnessing an unprecedented level of change in the threat environment. It has become more complex, increasingly fluid, less predictable, and consequently more challenging. Threat actors are conducting activities in the online space, simultaneously taking advantage of the technology that enables them to disguise their activities and their identities. Moreover, cyber actors have more opportunities than ever to conduct malicious activity as our world becomes increasingly interconnected. So while there's the criminal element, we investigate those as well as the hostile state cyber actors who conduct malicious activities to advance their country's interests, whether they be political, economic, military, security, or ideological. Hostile state actors seek to compromise computer systems by manipulating their users or exploiting security vulnerabilities to gain access to trade secrets or to achieve various objectives through the disruption of critical infrastructure and vital services. These types of activities are not going away and in fact are currently on an upward trajectory. CSIS has observed persistent and sophisticated state-sponsored threat activity for many years, and we continue to see a rise in the frequency and levels of sophistication of this threat activity. Canadian companies in almost all sectors of our economy have been targeted and compromised. Unauthorized, malicious access to Canada's critical infrastructure can have drastic consequences for the safety and security of Canadians. If you think about all the systems we rely on in our lives, including systems that support our telecommunications, energy, transportation, supply chain, health, and financial activities, any interference with these systems can have unforeseen impacts on our personal safety, our well-being, and our national security. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to an unprecedented numbers of individuals working from home offices, which are much less secure environments. This new standard of work increases the risk of exposure to malicious cyber activities on networks and sensitive information. We have heard all accounts of cyber criminals conducting ransomware acts on companies and public institutions, including hospitals at the height of the pandemic. So the increasingly interconnected and global nature of security threats means that CSIS cannot fulfill its mandate in isolation. There is tremendous cooperation and ongoing work within the security and intelligence community to provide the Government of Canada with the best intelligence and advice possible concerning cyber threat activity. Today's global threat environment requires that each partner use their unique mandate and legal authorities to protect Canada and Canadians, and that is exactly what CSIS has been doing and will continue to do. Again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this issue with you today, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. Mr. Khoury, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to appear today. My name is Sami Khoury, and I'm the head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, often referred to as the Communication Security Establishment's Cyber Centre. CSE, reporting to the Minister of National Defence, is one of Canada's key security and intelligence agencies with a 5-part cyber-centric mandate derived from the CSE Act introduced in 2019. We use our technical expertise across all 5 aspects of our mandate, and we do so to keep Canadians safe and secure.
I would like to give you a brief overview of the current cyber threat context. It's obvious that globally, cyber threats are evolving rapidly. The number and the degree of sophistication of cyber incidents, including incidents related to critical infrastructure, are on an upward trajectory. More and more important daily activities are also taking place online, including banking operations, government services, healthcare services, business and education, which is exposing them to threats. We've been able to observe this when the COVID-19 pandemic forced us to depend even more on digital infrastructure. Threat actors have taken advantage of this by multiplying attempts to exploit human and technological vulnerabilities.
Increase in cyber incident, I'd like to highlight some of the specific trends that we've observed. We assess that cybercrime remained the most likely threat to impact Canadians now and in the years ahead. Canadian individuals and organizations will continue to face online fraud and attempts to steal personal, financial, and corporate information. We also assess that ransomware directed against Canada will continue to target large enterprises and critical infrastructure providers. The protection of these organizations and networks is crucial to the productivity and competitiveness of Canadian companies and vital to Canada's national defense. And while cybercrime is the most likely threat to impact Canadians and Canadian businesses, the state-sponsored cyber programs of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran pose the greatest strategic threat to Canada.
In order to learn more about the cyber threats hanging over Canada, I would invite you to read the National Cyber Threat Assessment 2020 published by the CSE. I'm aware of the fact that the committee is currently concerned with the Russian attack on Ukraine. I cannot speak about our specific operations within the framework of this presentation, but I can confirm that we are closely monitoring the cyber threat activities related to these military manoeuvres.
Any specific threats to Canadian organization in relation to events in and around Ukraine. But as the situation evolves, I can assure you that we continue to monitor the cyber threat environment in Canada and globally, including cyber threat activity directed at critical infrastructure networks. Although the trends I have outlined today seem quite worrisome, the Cyber Centre is working tirelessly with stakeholders and building strong partnerships across Canada to develop a shared awareness of the threat landscape and promote the necessary measures to protect and defend against them.
We're also continuing to publish alerts and advisories that very much draw on Russian cyber threats. thereby enabling Canadians and Canadian businesses to improve their cybersecurity practices. The CSE is also sharing important intelligence on cyber threats with Ukraine to enable them to better defend their own networks. We are also collaborating with the DND and the Canadian Armed Forces on measures that foster intelligence-related cooperation and also support cybersecurity.
Threat environment rapidly evolves. We must all play our position. Cybersecurity is a whole of society concern, and it will take all of our expertise and collaboration to protect Canada and Canadians. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm pleased to answer any question you may have. Merci de m'avoir donné.
Thank you for having given me the opportunity to appear before you today.
Mr. Curry, thank you, Ms. Henderson. We go to our 6-minute round. Ms. Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for being here with us today. We very much appreciate it. Ms. Henderson, what type of cyber threats does Canada face on a daily basis, and what portion of those attacks are state-sponsored?
So on a daily basis, my understanding right now is regularly Canada suffers thousands of cyber threat attacks on a daily basis all across the country, and numerous organizations are under that attack. I wouldn't have for you actual stats on which particular countries those are coming from. I would leave that to my colleague, Sammy. But what I can say, or the quantity, let me correct that. I wouldn't know the quantity from each particular country. Sammy may have better stats on that. But what I can say is that we certainly use all of the tools that we have in our toolbox to investigate any of those threats. And as Sammy
I understand
noted,
that, but when I was Minister of National Revenue, which is some years ago now, the Liberals are happy to hear, that we suffered through thousands of cyber attacks daily in revenue. I've been told it has proliferated since then, and it's much, much more. So would you agree with that it's an ever-increasing issue?
Yes, I would. It is an ever-increasing issue, and it's something that we all need to be alive to. As we have moved forward and technology has advanced, there has been much more cyber activity in that area and much more cyber actors. Historically, we focused on state-sponsored, but with the proliferation of tools, many more actors have entered the arena.
And for either of you to answer this question, what would you say are the most vulnerable sectors of Canada's economy to cyber strikes?
I can start with that one. One of the things I worry very much about, and the service investigates and tries to do a lot of outreach to inform our research industries and our companies that are involved in research and development. As you know, Canada is a top leader in research and development and has a lot of very valuable intellectual property. And there are numerous countries out there that would like to get that hands on that research without having to put the money and investment into it. So all of those industries, we really work to outreach and try and create that awareness so that they can protect themselves. We are also very focused on our critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is necessary to maintain our day-to-day lives, and that is another area that could be very vulnerable and would need to ensure high level of protection and awareness. And perhaps I can pass to Mr. Curry for some further comments.
Do you have a comment on that, Mr. Curry? The most vulnerable sectors of Canada's economy?
From a Cyber Center, thank you for the question. For the Cyber Center perspective, our priority is to defend Canada against all cyber incidents, regardless of the sector. But we are paying particular attention to the critical infrastructure sectors to make sure that they have the necessary tools to protect themselves.
I'm not sure. Perhaps Mr. Curry is better to answer this one. In terms of cyber threat, how would you rate these state actors in their cyber attack capabilities? China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran.
In our national cyber threat assessment of 2020, we called out the capabilities of the four of them, the Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, as being state-sponsored program of the greatest strategic threat to Canada. It's difficult to compare one against the other, but I would suggest that in the current context, we have to be mindful of the geopolitical tensions and sort of the Russian cyber threat.
And how would you rate a cyber threat posed by Anonymous?
Anonymous, like many other organizations, bring a certain level of threat to the cyber security of a country. We've seen some of them align with Russia, some of them align with the Ukraine cause in the context of the current geopolitical tension. Again, we learn as much as possible from all of these, from all of the incidents, and that's why we encourage all victims to report to us so that we can learn and promote new cybersecurity practices. But we take all of that information, digest it, and put out new advice and guidance.
And are you aware that Huawei was involved in a hacking attempt in Australia Telecom? Australia, of course, being a member of our Five Eyes Alliance.
I will defer to Australia to comment about the nature of the incident that they.
I didn't ask you the nature of it. I said, are you aware that it happened?
We track the activities of Huawei and other telecom operators around the world, and that helps informs the security of the Canadian telecom infrastructure.
Are you also aware that China Telecom Americas, China Unicom Americas, and Comnet have also been accused of spying for the government of China?
Again, we track all of these reporting, and they help formulate the position of the Cyber Center and in how to protect the Canadian telecommunication infrastructure.
Ms. Henderson, are you aware of the Chinese national intelligence law that makes it mandatory for state and non-state enterprises to gather intelligence for the Chinese state on demand?
Yes, I am aware of that law. It is a law that was brought in, I believe, in 2017, if I'm correct, and that law does compel all Chinese companies to support any requirements of the Chinese government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Finley. Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being here to answer our questions today. Ms. Henderson, I'm going to begin with you, and if you believe that Mr. Khoury can answer some of the questions a little bit more in depth, then I'm happy to have you pass that on as well. You mentioned that there's an increase in the sophistication of cyber attacks over the years, and that things are only likely to continue heading in that direction, and that there's more and more of them each time. Do you believe that CSIS, along with its partners, has the tools that they need in order to meet these new sophisticated threats? And considering that things are becoming more and more sophisticated as time goes on, do you think that these organizations, including yours, will be able to continue to meet these threats and counter them?
That's a very good question. Thank you for it. It's very important, as I think both myself and Mr. Khoury have said, that every agency that has national security responsibilities is able to investigate those attacks using the tools that each agency brings to the fight, in a sense, and that's why it's extremely important that we all cooperate together in order to fulfill each of our mandates, and within that umbrella, then we can successfully combat the current threat environment that we're facing. It's also important, I believe, that all Canadians and all businesses and industries also are very aware of the cyber threat and then can take the necessary precautions and measures to protect themselves. I think it's also important as we move forward in the future to make sure that we are continually looking at whether or not we do need new tools and whether or not there are ways that we can improve. And that's why we do talk about looking at modernizing, for example, the CSIS Act, just to see if there are new tools that we would be able to bring to bear that would help protect Canada and Canadians as we move into the future. But I would reiterate, extremely important that each agency cooperates and we do communicate very well together to make sure that we're all using all the tools that we have in our toolkit at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Khoury, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you for the question. I would echo what Ms. Henderson said, that this is a whole of society effort. We learn a lot from what is all of the cyber incidents in the government, and then from that experience, we promulgate that information to public sector, private sector, and Canadian citizens at large, so that we collectively make a dent into the cost of cybersecurity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I guess going on what you just mentioned, which is modernizing the CSIS Act, is there anything that you can recommend here without necessarily compromising Canadian cybersecurity? Anything that you'd like to mention that we should be looking into, even within our report and our own recommendations here on the Defense Committee? And is there anything, I guess the second question would be, if you can try to get both of them answered in one shot, are there any obstacles that are currently there that exist that prevent us from improving the current Canadian situation?
There's no obstacles per se that would prevent us. What I think we need to do is make sure that, one, we have all the tools that are necessary and are fully aware of where technology is moving and how it's developing. And then it's extremely important that we balance the rights and privacy of Canadians as we're moving forward. So it's a very delicate way to move forward, to make sure that we have the tools to catch the bad guys, but are also protecting the rights of Canadians. And that takes quite a bit of research and study to make sure that we're getting to where we are and what we need in order to protect our national security.
Mr. Corey, do you have any recommendations for this particular study that you'd like to share with us today?
From a cyber center perspective, that teamwork across government and across Canada is extremely important. Reporting cyber incidents will be very important, so that we learn from all of those incidents that are happening, and then we can up the cybersecurity of the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have left?
Just a little over a minute.
Okay, so I guess my next question is a completely different category, and it has to do a little bit more with Russia. We know that a lot of the cyber threats that we have are coming from Russia, and a lot of the cyber attacks, are coming from Russia. And I wanted to know if you think that, or I wanted to know how they are able to deny that they are doing, that they're committing such acts. Who do they use in order to get to Canadians, and in order to really influence Canadians in any way to think a certain way?
So I can start. What I would say on that is Russia is an extremely capable threat actor. We know that Russian intelligence services have previously engaged in disinformation campaigns to discredit and create divisions in the West, to promote Russia's influence abroad, and to push for an end to Western sanctions. We also know that Russia covertly gathers political, economic, military information in Canada through targeted threat activities in support of their own interests. While I can't go into any specific measures, I can say that CSIS uses the full suite of its tools at its disposal to counter those Russian activities.
Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Henderson, Mr. Coley, for being here. I have a first question for Ms. Henderson, but of course you're welcome to jump into Mr. Coley. First, I'd like to know whether Canada has the capacity to actually track cryptocurrency coming from or flowing towards illegal and terrorist groups.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for that question. I do not have the information to answer that.
Direct you to FinTrack, who would be the better department to answer that type of question.
Monsieur Coury, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter?
Mr. Coley, would you like to add something? Well, I was also just going to suggest that we should refer this to FinTrack. They're better equipped to answer that question. Thank you. So perhaps that would lead me on to another question then. As far as you're concerned, for both the CSE and the CSIS, do you think that you work in too isolated a way? And also with the CAF, is there enough communication between the CAF and yourselves? Thank you for that question. I would say absolutely. There's constant contact with our neighbours, the CSIS, and also with our colleagues in the CAF. And we support them in their unifier and also in their reassurance mission. So there's good channels for an exchange of information between ourselves and these two entities. We also work with the rest of the government to attenuate risks that arise against the federal government and also with our partners in the provinces and in the private sector. And then a more specific question, this subject, Ms. Henderson, could you give us an overview of the role of the task force Osprey? Or rather, it's for you, Mr. Coury, within the CSE. Could you tell us a bit more about the Osprey task force, please? Well, perhaps I should refer this on to the Canadian Armed Forces to answer that question. Or otherwise, I can come back to you with an answer. I can't give it to you just now if they're not able to answer. But I do understand it's part of an organisation of the armed forces that works within the CSE. Is that correct? Well, I'd like to confirm that in writing, if you allow me to do so. Yes, of course. Thank you. I'd also like to know, perhaps for one of you or both of you, has Canada been forced to privatise to a certain extent some of these services to make sure that they have enough competence, perhaps they didn't have enough staff or enough equipment. So have you had to turn to the private sector sometimes? The Cybersecurity Centre plays an important role in the integrity of our supply chain. So if there's a need and we need to examine privatisation in more detail within the federal government, then we have a role to play also in the assessment of this programme. But if it's a domestic threat, perhaps we should turn to Ms. Henderson to give more nuances to that. Well, my question was more to see whether the CSE or the CSIS have already had to turn to the private sector for certain operations to fill in some gaps that you might have within CSIS or the CSE. Yes, we do work with the private sector on lots of different files. In certain cases, they share with us certain cyber threat details. So it's a complementary relationship, really. But if there's a cyber incident, there's certain things that the CSE or the CSIS does not do. Then it's the private sector that steps in and will help a victim, for example, to get re-established. Thank you. And now a question more for Ms. Henderson. Perhaps, Ms. Coury, you can jump in afterwards. For some years now, we've been talking about having an external intelligence organisation because the human aspect doesn't really exist on foreign territory. So with the war in Ukraine and these new threats for Canada, would it be relevant to explore this idea to have a model which would be more based on the CIA model, if you like? Thank you very much for that question. I'll answer in English.
So this is another very interesting question. What I would say is that under Section 12 of the CSIS Act, we can do an investigation overseas if it is determined that there is a threat to our national security. What we cannot do overseas is any activity under Section 16 of the CSIS Act, which is allowing us to collect political information or economic information in the support of national defense or foreign affairs. So under Section 12, threats to the security of Canada, not an issue. It's under Section 16 that we must remain within Canada to collect any intelligence.
Merci. Je ferai des questions de suivi à mon prochain.
Thank you very much. I have follow-up questions afterwards.
Madame Matheson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much to both witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've, of course, seen the weaponizing of social media here in Canada. Online troll farms have been set up. There's been such a sowing of distrust and hate and online conspiracy theories. We've seen them interfere potentially in our elections, certainly within general society. The NDP have called on the government to convene a national working group to counter online hate and protect the public safety. So in what ways can we make social media platforms legally responsible in terms of that furtherance of that mistrust, that interference in elections, and that those online conspiracies to remove that extremism before it can cause real harm?
I can thank you for the question. In the National Cyber Threat Assessment of 2020, we mentioned that the internet was at a crossroad and that we are seeing more and more of that misinformation, disinformation that's not limited to political campaign or election periods. So it's much broader. We're seeing much broader use of misinformation and disinformation. We're definitely seeing in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. From a cyber center perspective, we're calling out those activities. We're not a regulatory agency, so we're not here to offer a comment on the social media platform themselves. But how do we work with Canadian at large on identifying misinformation and disinformation, be an informed reader, make sure that they know they get the news from reputable sources, be it a news perspective or also from an IT perspective, that the domain that's hosting the information is one of reputable too. And we've put out a bulletin very recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, specifically on disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, that we hope people will also read and draw from it some nuggets of information that will help them in their information gathering or in their social media presence.
So you're putting the onus upon individuals themselves. You don't see any role per se in terms of what social media companies need to play in this, or is that what you're saying?
From the Cyber Center perspective, our role is to sort of defend the country from cybersecurity incidents and give Canadian businesses the necessary tools to raise the cybersecurity bar. We are not an agency or a center that is here to regulate social media, and I will probably defer to other government agencies to maybe answer that element of the question.
Okay, Ms. Henderson, do you say the same as Mr. Curry, or something slightly different, or?
No, I believe that Mr. Curry has actually answered the question, as neither of our two agencies are here to regulate social media platforms. That is the responsibility of other departments and perhaps society as a whole as to how we want to manage that situation.
Okay. Changing topics a little bit. In terms of recruitment and retention, we've certainly heard a great deal about the challenges that the Canadian Armed Forces has had in that regard. Can you comment on whether or not CSIS has faced similar challenges in terms of recruiting and ensuring that we have the necessary talent within the ranks to tackle those cyber threats that we're discussing today?
So CSIS has a very active recruitment program looking for the right talent, and we're always exploring new ways to find the right talent and bring them into the service. There are many Canadians out there who are extremely interested in working in national security in our department, and we are finding ways to encourage them to join, encourage them to stay. You mentioned retention, and with the changing work environment, that sometimes gets a little challenging in a national security world, but we are looking at all avenues to recruit and retain our staff.
Earlier in our committee, several weeks ago now, we had a expert come before us, Dr. Christian Luprecht from RMC, and he told the committee that there simply aren't enough resources to attract the talent in the Canadian Armed Forces, and so he said that the CAF, for example, and specifically, are competing against about 200,000 unfilled cyber positions in North America, and again, that challenge is getting the right people through the door and interested in that idea of national security. Does CSIS find the same problems and issues in terms of that huge competitive nature, I guess, of the industry?
CAF is a much larger organization than we are, so they would have much different types of recruitment challenges than we do. But we certainly have witnessed a huge interest in coming and working for the service, just in the volume of applications that come to us on a regular basis.
Thank you, Ms. Masson. That completes the first round. Second round starts with Mr. Doherty. I see we've got 25 minutes worth of questions in 20 minutes. I can just let it go at 5 minutes a pop, and we'll just start late. So, Mr. Doherty, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for being here. I'll pose this question to both Mr. Khoury and Ms. Henderson. Very straightforward. Does Huawei pose a threat to Canadian safety and security?
From a cyber perspective, the security of the telecom is something we take very seriously, and the government is conducting an examination of these emerging technology and noted that a decision will be announced in due time. So in the meantime, we are working with partners and other agencies to mitigate the risk stemming from the use of these designated technologies, including Huawei and ZTE.
Ms. Henderson?
I'm not going to speak specifically to Huawei, but what I would note is, further to response to a question I answered earlier, is that the Chinese national security law compels any of these companies to engage in activities in support of the government's requirements. So
which is why I asked that question.
Yes, so that's...
I get it. Would you... further to that question then, and that comment, Ms. Henderson, would you say that certain policy positions in recent years has hurt our standing within our Five Eyes? We're being left out of important meetings because we still have Huawei at the table and are still partnered with Huawei.
Well, what I would say is, right now, the government of Canada is engaged in an ongoing review that's led by public safety, and it's determining the Canadian approach for the implementation of 5G technology and telecommunication networks.
But do you believe that we, our allies, see this as a threat and have concerns over Huawei still being at the table with Canada?
So all of our allies have taken different approaches to the 5G and to Huawei and to the implementation, and they're all adopting various mitigation measures to protect their national security in response to the needs of their unique environments. And we all continue to talk and work very closely together.
But do you feel, again, there are concerns with our allies with respect to Huawei and Canada's partnership with them?
I couldn't speak to what the allies are thinking at this point, but what I can say is that we all work very closely together.
How would you define, say, a cyber, for lack of a better term, Pearl Harbor attack, and are we prepared for it?
We work very closely with our partners around the world, as well as our domestic partners, to really educate and inform the critical infrastructure, the various business enterprises, industry, our own government departments to shore up their resources and protect their cybersecurity. And we constantly work together to learn of new ways that we may be attacked so that we can prepare and help support all of our departments to protect themselves against a massive cyber attack.
What keeps you up at night?
Lots of things keep me up at night.
Well, what is the perfect storm, and what keeps you up at night with respect to our national security and the cyber attacks, cyber threats?
I would say at the moment that we are all working extremely hard and closely monitoring the current situation and environment, monitoring the advances in technology so that we can make sure we have the defenses to protect ourselves. We are only as strong as the weakest link, which means we really need to work together, educate, learn from anybody's mistakes so that we can shore up everything and protect ourselves today and into the future. It's a constant evolving environment, and we can never let our guard down because there is always a threat actor out there that would be willing and try to take advantage of our systems and our country and have a hugely negative impact on our national security.
Well, I won't put words into your mouth, but you've said that we're only as strong as our weakest link. Would you say that Canada is viewed as a weak link within our Five Eyes system because we are still considering Huawei and in negotiations with Huawei?
No, I would not, because as I noted earlier, every country needs to find the mitigation measures that work in their specific instance, and we all work extremely closely to share information to make sure that we're all helping each other protect ourselves as we move into the future.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Doherty.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher, what keeps you up at night? You have 5 minutes to tell us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I won't get into what keeps me up at night, but I'm sure it's not at the level of our amazing witnesses. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your testimony. I was trying to read an awful lot to sort of prepare for today's meeting, and there's an awful lot here with cyber threats and cybersecurity. In fact, throw a compliment out to Ms. Gallant across the way. When I was first on the National Defense Committee, she was one of the ones that was leading the charge on cyber threats and cybersecurity, and I did learn quite a bit from her. In some of the reading that I've done, talked about Canada being a almost collateral damage when it comes to cyber threats and cybersecurity, basically based on our proximity to the United States and our connections to the U.S. Is that, and I ask both of you, maybe start with Ms. Henderson, but is that still true now that we've just unleashed significant sanctions on Russia? Are we now going to be, none of us around this room are welcome in Russia anymore for our summer vacations? Are we more than collateral damage now since we have enacted those massive sanctions on Russia and its oligarchs?
As I noted earlier, we work really closely with our partners because, and as Mr. Doherty pointed out, I did say we're only as strong as our weakest link, but because we work all so closely together to share from each other's experiences, learn, develop, then I would not say that we were collateral damage. I would say that we are a partner and we work closely with our allies to build those partnerships and our knowledge and awareness.
Okay, I wasn't sure if Mr. Corey was going to chime in on that, but that's fine. Thank you for that.
I was going to echo
what
Ms. Henderson says.
So many state actors are now contracting out to, criminal networks, for instance, as we hear about Russia on a regular basis. How are we to follow up on state actors when they're contracting out their cyber threats around the world? And that's for either whoever wants to answer that.
I'm happy to maybe take a first crack at that. So thank you for the question. We are aware of the connection between the Russian intelligence services and cyber criminal organizations. And that is something that we've identified in our National Cyber Threat Assessment of 2020. And more recently, in the context of the Ukraine and Russia conflict, we have seen criminal organization or cyber criminal organization take sides on one way or another. From a cyber center perspective, we have the task of defending the country, defending Canada, defending critical infrastructure against all sorts of threats, irrespective of whether it is nation state or cyber criminal, and to promote sort of cybersecurity across the board. Obviously, calling out a country for cyber activity is a whole of government, and GAC has the lead on the attribution framework. So we would provide, from a cyber center perspective, we would provide one piece of input to the dossier that will help the Department of Foreign Affairs, GAC, make a determination on naming a country more publicly.
In 45 to 60 seconds, can one of you help me better understand ethical hackers, what an ethical hacker is?
I would say it's a hacker without ill intent. So somebody who will hack into a system to discover a vulnerability and then report it to the system owner to say, I found this vulnerability in your system, and that's how you should fix it, as opposed to a hacker who goes in and steals information and then maybe holds it ransom or makes damage to the system.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think I know the answer to this, but where do most cyber attacks or attempted cyber attacks come from? And more importantly, how do we defend against them as a country?
Cyber attacks, from the perspective of the Cyber Center, come from pretty much everywhere. We defend the government against cyber attack that come from everywhere. Also from different intents, be it state-sponsored or criminal. And to defend is to raise the bar, is to put out as much as possible timely information. So the quickest, the measure of success here would be how quickly we detect it, how quickly we mitigate the incident, and how quickly we turn into a lesson learned so that we can help protect.
Thank you, Mr. Corey, Mr. Fisher. Madame Normandine, you have 2.5 minutes to contain this shocking outbreak of collegiality.
Thank you very much. Chair, I'd like to come back to two of the questions that I put. First of all, on FinTruck, would it be better to have more follow-up and collaboration with FinTrack and CSIS when we're talking about money that can be used by terrorists and in particular cyber currencies?
Merci pour cette question.
Thank you very much for that question. We're very well connected with our FinTrack colleagues, but we don't have an investigative mandate. So if there's cyber currencies that are moving around, often it's where there's ransoms or there's a criminal angle to this. So then I put the question to the RCMP, which has got more jurisdiction, more competences to deal with that. And then, Ms. Henderson, you've talked about Section 12 of the CSIS Act, where it's possible to have investigations overseas. So it is possible, but I'd like to know whether it would be desirable to put that on a more formal footing and have a permanent overseas service to make sure that the CSIS has more tentacles, if you like, throughout the planet.
So CSIS is a domestic intelligence agency, and as I said, we have the ability and the authority to investigate any threats overseas that are a threat against our national security. We do have representation overseas, as it's publicly acknowledged. We have an officer in Paris, London, and Washington that support any of the work and the relationships with our partners overseas. So we do have the ability to investigate to protect our national security.
Et finalement, rapidement, une question.
And then a quick question in terms of proportion. We know there's cyber attacks that might be for ransoms and others are to destabilize countries. What's the proportion between these two types of attacks in Canada? Either of you can answer? Well, it's difficult to give a specific figure because we know that incidents are very much underreported. So it's not everyone who's an incident, a victim incident, who actually will report that to us. I can describe the government attacks, but it's difficult to compare that with what's happening on the ransom side of things. But it's true that the government is an attractive target for this. Thank you. That's my time.
Thank you. Media reports have cited unnamed U.S. officials saying China has signaled a willingness to provide economic, military supports potentially to Russia's attack in Ukraine. What is the likelihood, in your estimations, that China would extend that support, that maybe potential cooperation on cyber operations when it's targeting Western nations, Ukraine, Western allies? That would be for both, I would assume.
Okay. We know that, again, from the cyber threat assessment, that China has a state-sponsored cyber program, same way as Russia. And we have to defend the government and more broadly Canadian society against both threats, be it a strategic threat against the government or intellectual property theft or things like that. The nature of the engagement or the nature of the relationship between Russia and China, I would defer that to our intelligence colleague who might be in a better position to speak about.
So I wouldn't want to speak particularly about the relationship between China and Russia, but what I would say is both of them are extremely capable threat actors who will operate in their interests and what works best for their requirements.
Yep.
Mr. Motz, 5 minutes.
No, thank you, Chair. And thank you, witnesses, for being here. And nice seeing you again, Ms. Henderson. Hopefully, my question doesn't put you on the spot. First, I will deal with a question from NSCOP, from the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, in their report, and I won't get into it because it's a long one, but they cited and described the 2017 cyber breach of the Department of National Defense Network that resulted in the theft of a state actor, it's a theft by a state actor of significant amounts of information. The network in question was not part of the Shared Services Canada Enterprise Internet Service and therefore lacked protection by CSC's network sensors. And I'll ask you first, but I'm sure Mr. Corney will weigh in as well. Importantly, the compromised network contained legacy technology that could not be patched and was therefore vulnerable to cyber threats. So has DND and Canadian Armed Forces now are they using up-to-date and fully patched technologies in all their systems and networks?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I don't know if Mr. Corey would have a response for you on that front.
Again, I would defer to DND to answer that question on the specific state of their IT.
Well, I appreciate that from both of you, and I know you have to be careful, but, I mean, it was your organization that identified the problem. Are you still as alarmed that problem exists, that they still have some security vulnerabilities with unpatched technology?
We have worked tirelessly with DND, but also with the rest of government to increase the coverage of the sensors that the Cyber Center has made available to the government for defense. So definitely we are in a much better space today than we were in 2017. As far as technology and legacy systems, I will defer to DND. They know their environment best to say whether or not certain technologies have been updated.
Fair enough. So you mentioned it, Mr. Carney, before, just a second ago. I'm going to ask you, how prevalent is the issue of unpatched legacy software in the federal systems and networks more generally? You said that you're getting better. Do we still have some vulnerabilities? I do not want you to identify them, but how are we doing compared to even, like, say, 2-3 years ago?
Thank you. I would say we're much better, but patching system is not without risk, and every department, including shared services and others, have to weigh in the impact of patching a system. Sometimes it breaks technology or it breaks systems currently in use. So I will defer to them to assess. But we have put together quite a slew of security capabilities to protect the federal government that we're very proud of at this point.
So as part of the Canadian Armed Forces Operation Unifier, CSE is sharing threat intelligence with Ukraine and helping Ukraine defend itself against cyber attacks. So are CSE and or the Canadian Armed Forces engaging in active cyber operations as part of Operation Unifier?
We have when we see cyber activities directed against the Ukraine, we have shared those cyber indicators with the Ukrainian officials so that they can better defend their networks. But beyond that, the question of cyber operations, unfortunately, I'm unable to answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. So on February the 25th of this year, a day after Russia invaded Ukraine, Conti Group, a Russian affiliated organized crime organization that specializes in ransomware attacks, they pledged its support for the invasion and threatened a retaliation for any war activities directed at Russia. Other ransomware groups joined Conti Group in its pledge of support. So how have the Conti Group and other ransomware groups' threats of retaliation affected Canada's cyber defense planning? And that's for both of you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We are familiar with the Conti Group. They've been active in Canada pre-invasion, so we have a good body of knowledge on how to defend against them. We have launched a major ransomware campaign in December to call attention to the problem, and as a follow-up to the Russia invasion of the Ukraine, twice we've issued threat bulletins to critical infrastructure operators, calling attention to the threat posed by Russia and Russia-affiliated groups to better defend themselves. So we're constantly learning from what is going on out there and updating our advice and guidance, updating our threat feeds, our indicators of compromise,
Thank you.
And defending.
Thank you, Mr. Khoury. Thank you, Mr. Motz. Mr. May, final 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses this afternoon. Mr. Khoury, can you comment and elaborate on the work of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity's work with various industry sectors?
Yes, thank you for the question. So while the Cyber Centre primary mission is to protect the government and lead the response to cyber incidents, we work side by side with the public and the private sector. And then we have a number of engagement platforms with the sector, so sectoral tables, be it energy, electricity, healthcare. Some meet more regularly than others. So the healthcare roundtable, which includes across Canada healthcare, the healthcare community, hospitals, clinics. We meet with them weekly, if not every other weeks. With the electricity sector, we have started a pilot called Lighthouse to appreciate the threat posed on their networks. And likewise for the Canadian Gas Association, we have another pilot with them where we work collaboratively to appreciate the threat on their landscape. But beyond that, we also care about national level outcomes. So we have worked with the Canadian Internet Registry to make available free of charge to Canadians a protective DNS service, so that when you browse online, if you point to Canadian Shield, you can be assured that there's no malicious site, malicious website to where you're going. So we have a pretty broad engagement program with the private sector.
Thank you. which critical sectors, critical infrastructure sectors, would you say best equipped to defend against cyber attacks?
It's difficult to compare one sector against another. The threat could be different. So our role at the Cyber Center is to make sure that we pass on all the information to all the critical sector, be it finance, energy, transportation, healthcare, and make sure that they all have the necessary tools to protect themselves in the event of a cyber attack. But it's difficult just to say which one is better prepared than the other.
I appreciate that, but maybe a better way to ask that is which sectors need to significantly improve in your opinion, like which need more work, and how do we help them raise that bar?
I think the sector maturity is there's a program where we can work with the various entities to assess their cybersecurity maturity, and we're happy to work with all of them. Every sector needs something different, so the programs that we tailor to, for example, municipal engagement are different than the programs that we tailor to the banking sector, so we have to cover the entire waterfront of the Canadian sector so that we can make sure that they're all protected.
And just my last question, and I guess both of you could weigh in if you each take about 35 seconds, which may not be fair. Would in your opinion, reporting requirements such as those recently enacted in the United States improve the situation in Canada? Mr. Corey, maybe you could start.
We know that ransomware incidents are underreported, and we encourage everybody to reach out to us, small or big incident, to share with us what they've learned to share with us the nature of the cyber incident so that we can learn from it and quickly turn around and mitigate the threat across Canada. So the maximum reporting, the better. The more reporting, the better it will be to raise the collective bar across Canada.
I would second that. I fully believe that we really need to have open communication and discuss, raise the issues, and encourage anybody to report an incident, and make sure that many companies are very uncomfortable. They think that would reflect very negatively on them. All of that can be managed in a secure manner so that you are not giving out identities, but that we're collecting as much information as possible to protect other companies and themselves.
Thank you very much, both of you.
And on behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank both of our witnesses, Mr. Corey and Madame Henderson, for their contribution to our threat analysis study. Cyber is unique in that it seems to be awfully difficult to wrap your head around what's going on, given the obscure nature of it and its pervasive nature. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your work on behalf of our nation. And with that, we're going to suspend while we re-empanel. Thank you. we have Benoit Dupeau, Professor in Canada, Research Chair in Cybersecurity, Université de Montréal, and John Huey, National Security Officer with Microsoft. So I'm going to call on each of you for your 5-minute statements. Going with Professor Dupont first for 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Je vous remercie,
Thank you very much, Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, for inviting me to appear before you. I will answer your questions in both official languages, but I will testify in French. I'm Professor at the University of Montreal, Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity, and Scientific Director of the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership, which brings together some 30 cybersecurity researchers and government and private sector partners, including Microsoft. Like the other witnesses who have preceded me in appearing before this committee, I would like to place emphasis on the technological transformations that are redefining the parameters of the military conflicts in which Canada is and will be engaged in the near future. Cyber attacks and disinformation are obviously on everyone's minds in light of the ongoing invasion and conflict in Ukraine. But on a longer time horizon, digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, 5G, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, or the advent of neural interfaces also represent challenges that may radically alter armed conflict. These foreseeable and announced changes oblige us to reflect on the strategies that must be implemented now to prepare for them. Firstly, I believe it is essential to reflect on the medium and long-term strategic implications of these technologies in order to anticipate the role they will play in future conflicts, for example, in 2025 or 2030, and to start preparing for them now, both by acquiring new technical capabilities and by recruiting and training the operators who will be the ones to use these technical capabilities. This forward-looking work is essential if we want our armed forces to be able to adapt proactively to a constantly changing environment. These technological changes must also be accompanied by profound changes in the recruitment and training of cybersecurity specialists, whose role will become increasingly important. The general shortage of manpower in this field, which has already been mentioned by my colleague Christian Leprecht, also impacts the private sector and will require creativity on the part of the armed forces in order to be able to attract qualified people. Some countries have already set up specific recruitment procedures for their armed forces, whereas others have chosen to develop specialized reserve forces that can quickly mobilize qualified personnel in times of crisis. To my knowledge, Canada's thinking in this area remains at an embryonic stage. Beyond human resources, it seems to me vital to develop digital defense sovereignty in certain key technologies such as artificial intelligence or quantum computing, where Canada is a leader in terms of research but is lagging somewhat behind on the industrial front. This thus implies the intentional development of industrial innovation ecosystems that contribute to the defence of Canada and its allies. In this regard, I would like to remind you that the AUKUS Security Pact between the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia that was announced in September 2021 and to which Canada was not invited is not only about supplying nuclear submarines to Australia, it also calls for a strong integration of the three countries' research and development efforts and also the commercialization of these efforts in the strategic areas of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. In conclusion, faced as they are with an increasingly complex technological threat landscape and adversaries who are stepping up their use of cyber attacks, we will not be able to effectively respond to these challenges in traditional ways, which are already cruelly demonstrating their limits. Moreover, the innovations required will not be achieved by simply making a carbon copy of the solutions devised and implemented by our neighbour and our allies. is we need to take a deep dive into our interests, our resources, and our strategies, which should then in turn translate into bold action that will help us to catch up. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dupont.
Mr. Huey, Microsoft, please.
Good afternoon. Bonjour, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chairs. Let me begin by thanking you for inviting me to appear today to inform this committee on the cyber threats affecting Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces operational readiness to meet those threats. My name is John Huey. I'm National Security Officer with Microsoft here in Canada. One of our principal and global responsibilities as a company is to help defend governments and countries from cyber attacks. Seldom has this role been more important than during the past weeks in Ukraine. All of us at Microsoft are following closely the tragic, unlawful, and unjustified invasion. This has become both a kinetic and digital war with horrifying images as well as less visible cyber attacks on computer networks, accompanied with internet-based state-sponsored disinformation campaigns. Our single most impactful work in this area in Ukraine has been assisting the protection of Ukraine's infrastructure against Russian cyber attacks. These ongoing cyber attacks have been precisely targeted, and we are especially concerned about those on Ukrainian civilian digital targets, including critical infrastructure, emergency response services, and humanitarian aid efforts. We have deployed cybersecurity technical protections to dozens of targeted organizations in concert with the Ukraine government. We are also assisting organizations in Ukraine to move services to the cloud so they may continue to operate from potentially outside the country. Our disaster response teams have also been supporting numerous groups, providing aid to the Ukrainian people. Our efforts have involved constant and close coordination with the Ukrainian government, the European Union, the US government, NATO, and the United Nations. And we are committed to supporting Ukraine, protecting its government, helping protect its government, citizens, and our employees. While the events in Ukraine certainly have the world's attention, other cyber criminals continue targeting and attacking all sectors of critical infrastructure, including public health, information technology, financial services, and the energy sectors. Ransomware attacks are increasingly sophisticated and successful at crippling governments and businesses. The profits from these attacks are soaring, which lead to fueling criminal and state-sponsored financial interests. Global estimates indicate that cost of data breaches worldwide will reach in excess of $5 trillion by 2024. And during the past year, 58% of all nation-state cyber attacks observed by Microsoft have been attributed to Russia, followed by North Korea, Iran, and China. Russian actors are increasingly targeting government agencies involved in foreign policy, national security, and defense for intelligence gathering. The SolarWinds compromise at the end of 2020 by a Russian actor is an example of the increasing and concerning attacks observed against the supply chain. These and other insights are further detailed in the second annual Microsoft Digital Defense Report, which provides our view into the global cyber threat environment. Microsoft recently made an unprecedented global commitment to invest $20 billion in cybersecurity over the next 5 years. Our overall security strategy has a comprehensive approach across diplomacy by promoting digital peace and advocating for norms of acceptable behavior in cyberspace, disruption of cybercriminal infrastructure using innovative civil litigation and law enforcement partnerships, and of course, defensive cyber attacks that target Microsoft and our customers globally using advanced cloud technology, a zero trust approach to security, information sharing partnerships, and thousands of highly skilled people. A good example of partnerships is our 15-year relationship with Canada's Communication Security Establishment and now the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, where we share information on emerging threats and cyber defense techniques enabled through the Microsoft Government Security Program. As we look around us, it's apparent that digital technology plays a vital role in almost every aspect of our lives. Microsoft's mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, and we can only do so by protecting the digital world we all use. What has become very clear to the world is that cybercrime and state-sponsored attacks are a critical threat to national security and Canada's economy. No single entity can combat these threats effectively on their own. Working together with industry, academia, civil society, and government in Canada and internationally is paramount. Now, as a company at the forefront of cybersecurity, we are here to support, build knowledge and expertise, and play a key role in helping enhance preparedness for Canada, the whole of government, including the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you, members of the committee, for your time and attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, both of you. This is the 6-minute round, but I'm just looking at the clock, colleagues. It's not a snowball's chance that if we put 6 minutes and the other 5-minute round in, that we'll get anywhere as close to being finished. So I'm going to start with a 5-minute round. So with that, Mr. Doherty, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you to our guests for being here today. Mr. Huey, I'm glad that you brought up the 2021 Sunburst or Solar Winds cyber espionage incident. In your opinion, what responsibility should software and information technology providers have in ensuring that their products and service offerings are truly secure?
Thanks for that question. Certainly, technology providers have a critical responsibility to ensure that their software and services are as secure as possible, and Microsoft takes this responsibility extremely seriously. While we have led the world and led the technology organizations worldwide with the development and education around things like the security development lifecycle, which Microsoft pioneered over a decade ago, and of course, continued improvements around information sharing and partnerships with organizations around the world, governments, working with our competitors, including Amazon, Google, and many, many others across the security community, doing our absolute best to build reliable and trustworthy software. We're really, quite frankly, up against adversaries that are very determined, very patient, very well funded, and software today is incredibly complex. And while we aim to minimize vulnerabilities in software, it is a task that we're continuously vigilant on and continue to work towards.
One of the things that was interesting is we have had quite a bit of testimony saying that there's a drastic shortage in manpower, and as well that next generation of cybersecurity experts, those with those skills, as we move forward in the next the next 8 years, we're seeing that there's going to be about 3.5 million jobs open globally. What is Microsoft doing to help fill that gap within not only North America, but worldwide?
No, thanks. It's a great and, in fact, a very important question. We are also acutely aware of that resource and skilling shortage across the security community. We're taking a number of steps. Microsoft here, specifically in Canada alone in the last year, have invested millions of dollars in the security skilling and tools and programs to help bring new individuals, much more diversity into the security space here in Canada. We have partnerships and supporting various academia and academic institutions across the country with skilling programs. And I think trying to build awareness across the broader community that this is not simply something that's going to be solved by technical nerds who know how to configure network switches. This is, there are legal issues, civil rights issues, and just a diversity. We need a broad range of thinking brought in to fill this skills gap to together help combat this problem.
On the 28th of February, Microsoft President Brad Smith posted the following information. Several hours before the launch of missiles or movement of tanks on February 24th, Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center detected a new round of offensive and destructive cyber attacks directed against Ukraine's digital infrastructure. We immediately advised the Ukrainian government about the situation, including our identification of the use of a new malware package which we denominated Foxblade, and provided technical advice on steps to prevent malware's success. When and under what circumstances did Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center begin working with the Ukrainian government? You're on mute, I believe.
My apologies. Thanks for that question. Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center tracks a number of actors around the world on a constant basis. We've been doing that for a number of years, and that's really to help inform not just how we build cybersecurity protections into our products and services, but help inform and provide intelligence to our various customers around the globe.
Who is behind Foxblade?
I don't believe I have detail at hand on exactly who we've attributed Foxblade to, but that was certainly a malware wiper attack that was targeted at the Ukrainian infrastructure.
What was the objective, and was it achieved?
Very briefly, please.
The objective of the Foxblade wiper, what we're seeing, and this is a good example of what appears to be ransomware type attacks, infrastructure, but it is actually a destructive attack. So while the intention is to encrypt data, there is no ability to restore that data or intentions of the adversary to actually ransom the victim.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Mr. Spiegelman, 5 minutes, please.
Chair, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being with us this afternoon. This is an extremely complex area, as you've both outlined in our previous witnesses as well. It's highly interdisciplinary. We're really talking about the establishment of an ecosystem that in many parts has not been established yet, or has been insufficiently established. And then we have the Russia-Ukraine invasion that really has brought everything to a point, illustrating the urgency with which we need to look at this issue. So this goes into the private sector, it goes into public civilian infrastructure, it goes into the military side, and we saw through the response by the European Union, Canada, and many of our allies with respect to the application of sanctions, how quickly the private sector, the capital markets are implicated in a security question. I'd like you to just, each of you, maybe take a moment to sort of give us a thumbnail on how you think the state of this ecosystem is at the moment, looking at these complexities and interdisciplinarities, what needs to be done urgently from the perspective of the federal government, and then some of the challenges operationally with respect to human resources, changing our mindset, looking at security, digital security really as a urgently needed and ideally rapidly growing area of investment. If you could just maybe zoom back onto your initial comments with a bit more depth, 45 seconds each. I've got limited time. That would be helpful, I think. Professor Dupont, peut-être on va commencer avec vous.
Perhaps we could start with you first, Professor Dupont.
The government of Canada just announced $80 million investment in the Cybersecurity Innovation Network through IZED. I think this is a great initiative because it's going to bring together more than 120 academics and industry partners from the private sector, but also from provincial, municipal, and the federal government, of course. I think this needs to be really supported, probably accelerated as well. And in terms of training, we need to bring people from all kinds of disciplines. You mentioned it's an interdisciplinary approach. When we are reviewing all the disciplines involved, we've identified more than 40 disciplines, from public health to political science and psychology to computer science, of course. So I think we need to foster a lot more engagement and cross-disciplinary work in Canada, and to also think about how can this work be put to work to protect Canadian assets and Canadian vulnerable groups and critical infrastructures.
Thank you very much. Mr. Huey.
I would build on what my colleague just said here. Absolutely, no single entity can combat these threats on their own, and I think we heard similar themes from the previous witnesses, that we need strong collaboration across government, industry, academia, both domestically and internationally. I think it's important to recognize that when we're talking about cyberspace, that the private sector, private industry, especially cloud service providers like Microsoft, operate much of that infrastructure, or what the Canadian Forces would call the cyber battle space. And so we certainly have a very unique view, and probably a different view than what those government organizations may have as well. And so by working together, we can really complement each other's abilities to defend and protect both customers and organizations, governments, and all Canadians in that space.
Thank you both very much. I've got about a minute and a half left. Briefly on a more defense-related issue, each of you, what is your view on offensive capacity with respect to the cyber domain?
Maybe I'll go first, and I think that there's a short answer from Microsoft. Microsoft does not condone or involve itself in offensive cyber activities.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Dupont, s'il vous plaît.
This is something I have very little information about. I work in academia, so this is something that's really kind of very remote from my work.
Okay, that's helpful. That leaves me a bit more time. How stovepiped are we when we look at interdisciplinary connection points with respect to cyber attacks? How stovepiped and how separate are the various stovepipes in our system that need to respond to this? How well are they coordinated at the moment?
I think there is a real effort in trying to coordinate through the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and through other initiatives, but it's probably always still lagging, and we need to inject. I mean, this is such a complex issue that we need to probably inject a lot more effort and energy and money into it. So I think a lot more work remains to be done, but a lot of people are very much aware of the need to de-silo all those kind of isolated groups.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Normandin, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
5 minutes for you, Ms. Normandin. Thank you. I'll start with Professor Dupont. You said that Canada is lagging behind on the industrial level. We've talked about solar winds, and it was that's a think tank in the US that flagged this. Is this something that's missing in Canada, or is it more on the governmental side of things that there are gaps, or do we need to have a balance between the two and collaboration between the two that is lacking? FireEye is a private company. It's not a think tank, so they have the same type of expertise as Microsoft. And in terms of lagging behind in Canada, perhaps that's because these questions of cybersecurity are not at the top of the political agenda. It's seen as an important issue, but not necessarily a priority issue that needs to be dealt with at the highest levels, the highest political levels. Unlike other countries where these responsibilities are directly linked to the office of the president or the prime minister. So that's where we're different from other ally countries. That leads on to my next question. In terms of developing cyber capacity and the military side of things, are there international examples that you can name where we could draw some inspiration from some of these countries? There are some interesting initiatives where we could draw some inspiration in Europe, for example, and in the UK, where the army has got a cyber reserve to try and attract people from the private sector to work and get temporarily involved on national security issues. And Christian Leprecht also talked about a specific recruitment procedure in Germany where they can recruit people into military careers with a lieutenant colonel rank, where we can really accelerate their integration. And France has got cyber reserve units that they've set up as well. So there are some countries where there's very interesting initiatives underway, and countries have got an identical size. They don't have the unlimited resources that we see in the US, so we could draw inspiration from all that. Do you think that this type of initiative has meant that certain members of AUKUS are members, whereas Canada has been left out of that pact with Australia and the UK and the US? Yes, it's a question of priority that's given to these issues, and then the concurrent investments that have been agreed upon over the last few years. Yes, that's effectively the case. Now, you've talked about recruitment. We're going to be having another study on that. Do you think that the CAF has to review the criteria in terms of recruitment so that we can get specialised personnel and perhaps eliminate certain technical on-the-ground training aspects and avoid transfers that discourage people and put them off? Can we really concentrate on these skills more than military training in general? Yes, there's very specialised skills that are needed here. So that means that people have to guarantee that they can maintain these positions and these functions for several years. And then there's a question of wages that are significant as well. Even if people consider a military career and they're not motivated by going to the war, but we have to offer them competitive salaries compared to the private sector because they can offer excellent compensation packages. So we have to think about the compensation side of things for these specific posts. Now, you talked about digital sovereignty. Could you give us some more details on that? Are you referring to the fact that the governmental aspect should still have oversight on digital sovereignty, or should there be collaboration with private sector? Well, with digital sovereignty, I was saying that in Canada we need to develop companies and Canadian resources that are capable of producing technologies and Canadian services to deal with these strategic technology issues. So it's to help to develop companies and Canadian industries that can sell products outside of Canada and also provide the CAF with the right technologies where we can have full trust. So without necessarily looking at the public-private split there. Now, I don't have much time, but could you perhaps tell me, when we analyze cyber attacks in terms of ransoms compared to destabilizing a country, are we looking for the same things? Do we analyze them in the same way? And do we need to have the same skill set to analyze these two? Yes, it's the same competencies that are required to do the same type of analysis and identify how we should respond. Apart from with ransoms, there's other negotiating skills that can also be drawn on, but we see that more in the private sector. Thank you very much, and I think my time is up.
And 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. Professor sorry, I think pardon? DuPont, not Benoit. Thank you. That's right. Sorry. I was really taken in with your description of some of the technologies that are moving forward, and I think I was feeling as old as our chair is in terms of. Right? No. In terms of when you were talking about. All right. In terms. You were speaking about specifically the neural interfaces, and I would like to actually hear a lot more about that, and if you could expand on those technologies that you were describing.
So when I was talking about neural interfaces, they are a new brand of technologies trying to connect human brains to machines to go faster in the communications between those two components. So, for example, Elon Musk is investing a lot of money into a company called Neuralink, which is trying to implant electrodes into human brains to communicate much faster and in a much more effective way with computers. And the initial aim is to blend artificial intelligences with human intelligences. And this is not science. This is not science fiction. This is what's happening right now in terms of research and development.
And I believe that I've heard about that, where he it's the ability to I guess bypass some of the misconnections sometimes if someone's in an accident and their spinal cord isn't working in the ways that it should, and bypassing that through those neural links. That's what you're talking about specifically, or that's one of the examples of what you're talking about, basically.
Well, this is one of the examples. This is one of the early use cases, but the applications will be much broader than that. And how does that,
expand that to defense and that weaponization? Are you talking about that in terms of the defensive industry, I guess?
So we could be thinking about implanting neural interfaces into soldiers' brains to make them much more effective combatants.
How far away are we from that, in your estimation?
Well, it's hard to know because it's all very sensitive and very confidential. But I think this is, being developed at the moment, and there are papers and documentaries and investors investing millions of dollars into those technologies. So this is coming. This is for sure.
Considering Tesla's inability to make self-driving technology as quickly as they had wanted, I imagine that there's quite a lot of road bumps along the road, but no pun intended. But do governments around the world, internationally, and of course in Canada, have legislation in place, or even are they close to providing protections in terms of this new kind of technology that you're talking about? Not just the Neuralink, but the other technologies you were talking about.
I'm not aware of legislation being brought about, but I'm sure those technologies would be regulated by public health and pharmaceutical kind of regulatory frameworks, for sure.
Okay. In terms of, you had talked about, and you know, Madame Nobrena, she always takes my questions. But in terms of when you were referring to Dr. Leprec's discussions about recruitment, retention, the competition that the Canadian Armed Forces and our security forces have in terms of the unfilled cyber positions within our institutions, and that competition with corporate positions, a lot of that recruitment retention is actually discussed in the documentation from DND of strong, secure, and engaged. But it was also written several years ago. Is that still in line with what we need? Does that need to be updated? Where are we at in terms of where the government is headed in terms of that recruitment retention piece?
I think the needs are still very acute, and the types of profiles we need are pretty much the same. Technically trained people who are in very high demand, not only from the private sector in cybersecurity, but from other sectors in AI development and video games. So all IT industries are hungry for all those people, and they are competing ferociously to try to attract those talented people.
Thank you, Ms. Madison, for that wonderful set of questions on neural intellects. We can hardly wait for Ms. Gallant's 5 minutes of question. Ms. Gallant,
Mr. Chair,
5 minutes.
through you. Mr. Huey, you mentioned solar winds in the context of Canada's national defense and the attacks.
I mentioned SolarWinds just in the context of the emerging trend we're seeing across nation-state adversaries, but especially Russia, in compromising the supply chain. And so what I mean by compromising the supply chain is, instead of individually going after a specific entity individually, those actors will go after and try to compromise the software or technology systems that those companies used. So in the case of SolarWinds, Russia was attributed to compromising the SolarWinds company themselves, which their software is used by many companies around the world, including governments. And the data that we have indicates that single compromise of SolarWinds ended up impacting over 18,000 organizations worldwide. Now,
And
there was
is the scope of the attack still under investigation? The SolarWinds attack?
I don't have any detail to provide this committee on the current status of that investigation.
But no Canadian national defense software was impacted by it. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not aware either way.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that Foxblade. Do you know whether or not it's being used against NATO members?
I don't have insight into that information either. But I can say that this is not the first time that destructive malware has been used by a nation-state actor.
Would Foxblade have the potential to result in mass death?
I suppose if that was targeted at critical infrastructure in a way that had some type of catastrophic chain of failure, that could certainly impact human lives in a negative way.
So there's the term threat emulation technology, and it applied to Cobalt Strike. What is meant by that? And how would it be applied or used against our national defense?
I'm sorry, I'm not aware of the term threat emulation technology.
Threat emulation technology, no?
Threat emulation technology. No, sorry, I'm not aware of that term either.
Okay, so CSE judges that cyber threat actors will be very unlikely to intentionally seek to disrupt Canadian critical infrastructure and cause major damage or loss of life. That being said, how vulnerable are we with the Internet of Things, given that something as simple as your refrigerator is sending off pings? There seems to be so many vulnerabilities, and it is at the least protected throughway that is going to be attacked. So how can they be so confident, do you think, that will be unlikely to be disrupted?
I think it's really difficult to predict the future in this space, and is why we've seen a theme of needing to work together on sharing intelligence and looking at different ways to combat these threats, not just from the defensive perspective, but advocating for things such as what Microsoft is doing around our digital peace objectives around advocating for cyber norms of acceptable behavior in cyberspace. So there's consequences to these actors. Specific to your question about IoT, absolutely, that is a concern to Microsoft and many others across the industry, in that these devices are being plugged into the internet at a prolific rate, and there isn't necessarily the structure, the organization in the vendors or even the regulation around those to ensure that those devices are built or secure by design and securely operated, or even have the ability to be updated at a later point in time by the vendor. Okay. And so those things are easy targets for actors to compromise and then use against either government's critical infrastructure, Microsoft, and any organization in a future cyber attack.
Okay, so I didn't have a chance to ask in the first round, but there was that Give, Send, Go, US-based platform that was hacked. Do you have any knowledge of who the expected or suspected perpetrator is on that?
I'm sorry, we do not have any information on that particular situation.
Let me just go on. Mr. Galloway, welcome to the committee.
Well, thank you for having me, Mr. Chair, and hello to my colleagues and to the staff that are here and to the witnesses. And let me just say, Mr. Chair, I think you're getting better, not older.
10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes now? That's great. There you go. There's a bottle of scotch somewhere. Yes, indeed. I really want to thank you for your opening remarks and a lot of the great questions that have been thrown your way and your responses. And I want to pick up on one particular item. I think, Mr. Huey, you brought it up in terms of the importance, when you're looking at cybersecurity, of looking at this from an integrated approach. So government, private sector, academia. So there's a couple of questions I have, but I'll take two. And this is also for Mr. DuPont, but can you provide an example of where that's working well, that integrated framework, collaboration? And the second piece is around, I'll paint a picture, I guess. You have an opportunity to speak to that collaboration, private sector, governments, and academia. What are the first three things that you would recommend to that group to look at concretely and do a deep dive on? And we can start with Mr. Huey and then go to Mr. DuPont. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for the question. And I'd like to share a very timely and close to home example, and that's the work that Microsoft has done. I mentioned our longstanding collaboration with the Communication Security Establishment and the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Part of the threat intelligence that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity develops and curates as part of the things that they see through their various sensors and lens that is shared with critical infrastructure here in Canada. That same threat information is also shared with Microsoft, and that's done now over the past 2 years in an automated way. And so those indicators and those signals that are very contributed by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity end up helping improve the protections within all Microsoft products and services globally across the cloud, helping just provide that additional level of protection to customers worldwide in Canada, including the Canadian government and consumer organizations around the world. So I think that's very much a great example of that industry partnership and having real impact on by sharing key information.
Okay. Mr. Dupont?
Yes, another great example, I think, is the CCTX, the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, which brings together 150 Canadian companies and provides them with threat intelligence from both the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, but also the private sector, blends all these threat intelligence and shares that with Canadian companies, big and small, because one of the major issues is we've talked a lot about critical infrastructures, but Canada is a country of small and medium-sized businesses, and those businesses are really being hit by ransomware and cannot often afford the same kind of cybersecurity technologies. So we also need to be thinking about how can something where I think we need to be thinking a lot more.
We lost the last few moments. Yeah, if you could do that. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Dupont.
sorry.
Yeah.
So you want me to repeat
Yes,
the last few sentences?
we think we had a Russian hack here.
Okay, so or Chinese.
Okay.
I was just saying that the Canadian government needs to keep on thinking a lot more about how to help SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, because they employ 95% of the Canadian workforce and provide a lot of services and some of the critical functions to bigger companies. So we need, and they're also involved in supply chain attacks. And they have very limited resources to deal with cybersecurity issues.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
30 seconds.
Very quickly, the second part of my question for both of you. You have an opportunity to speak to that collaborative team, the best and the brightest, as it were, and you had one or two or three recommendations. What would they be? Let's go with one for sake of time.
Number one, the cybersecurity basics matter more than ever now. When I say the basics, I mean keeping systems up to date, using modern technology, and enabling things like multi-factor authentication. Microsoft's, our view of all of the attacks and customer compromises that we see, doing the basics and enabling MFA would prevent the vast majority of those. And unfortunately, as much as we work with things like Get Cyber Safe to build that education, there's still a lot of improvement we can do around just doing the basics.
Professor Dupont, you're going to have to work that answer into Madame Normandine's 2.5 minutes.
Thank you.
Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. A question to put to both of the witnesses. During the Ukrainian crisis, we've talked about computer hackers acting in good faith and who have hacked into certain networks in Russia upon request. So, Mr. Huey, to what extent are these hackers seen in a positive light? And then for you, Professor Dupont, in the long term, can they actually pose a risk if we let them go and we encourage them to do this, and then they would turn rogue and we wouldn't be able to control them if we've encouraged them to do this at the outset? So could you both analyse the role of in good faith computer hackers and how we can control that?
Alors, je vais y aller peut-être.
Well, I'll jump in first. Well, their role makes it even more complicated for government agencies to act, because it's very complicated to know who's doing what in this new environment where everyone wants to improvise and attack and hack, and they take up the cause and respond to very good faith calls. But the trouble is that some of these hackers do not understand all the nuances of the system that they're attacking. So they might launch attacks that will damage critical infrastructure in a country such as Russia and have an impact on the life of civilians who are not involved in the attacks against Ukraine. But these attacks could also have a spillover effect into other countries other than the Ukraine, and it could be difficult to control of that. So we have to tread very carefully and not get too enthusiastic about that and think through all of the implications beforehand. There's lots of unanticipated consequences of these attacks that could be covered carried out by certain isolated groups. Mr. Huey.
About 30 seconds.
Thank you for the question. I would reinforce that Microsoft's position is to that we certainly do not support cyber offensive activities, primarily for a number of reasons. But what we have seen is that cyber weapons are typically very difficult to target, and the potential for collateral damage and to spill beyond the intended targets, much like the NotPetya attack in Ukraine a few years ago that ended up impacting organizations around the world and costing hundreds of millions of dollars to recover from, is an example of where there's potential for that collateral damage that could be extreme.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
In spite of my better judgment, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the major issues that we've seen, of course, is in terms of that threat for cybersecurity is the issue of espionage, stealing Canadian intellectual property. What recommendations do you have for the committee to tackle this form of digital theft? And I would actually add a lot of our data is differently managed province to province. What challenges does that provide for the protections that are provided through cybersecurity and corporations like Microsoft? For both witnesses.
Maybe I can start with that one. Mr. Dupont can follow. Certainly in our digital defense report, we outline, some of the activity that we have seen and detected that includes espionage by nation state, some of the nation state adversaries that I mentioned previously. These actors, and quite frankly, whether it's cyber criminals or nation state actors, are really looking for gaps in our protections, gaps in our processes, and looking to exploit those. The general guidance that Microsoft would have, whether protecting against espionage or other types of ransomware attacks, quite frankly, would be similar. We would certainly encourage organizations with sensitive IP, or what we might call the high value assets, is to invest additional protections in those high value assets versus trying to just protect everything in the organization equally.
The Canadian government has launched a new research in security program to try to help or force or compel universities to better protect their intellectual property, raise their awareness, and I think that's an excellent initiative to try to counter the leakage of Canadian IP. But maybe the government needs to think about helping universities fund these new efforts they're required to undertake. That would be maybe a piece of advice.
Mr. Motz, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. For the sake of our Chair and to take you back to the very beginning, we all think we know what definitions mean, but can you, both of you, define very, very quickly what does cybersecurity mean, and what's the difference between a vulnerability, threat, and risk?
Maybe I can take a crack at that. Thank you for the question.
And a quick crack at that.
Cybersecurity is really about protecting your computer infrastructure or your identity in the digital context, on the internet, connected to a network. And so those protections, those security protections, extended to the cyber domain. A vulnerability is a problem within a piece of software code that could be exploited for unintended purposes by a particular adversary. Threats can be considered across a spectrum of criminal organizations, nation-state adversaries. We've also done work at Microsoft to try to shine a light on with the Toronto, with the Citizen Lab at the Monk School in University of Toronto on what we call private sector offensive actors who are building spyware for sale to governments and other organizations. And then really risk and risk management is what all organizations, at the core are looking to focus their business efforts on. There's always a trade-off between risks and benefits, and there's only a limited amount of money and people.
I'm gonna cut you off there, Mr. Microsoft. Mr. Dupont, anything to add from that or different from that substantially?
Well, just on top of that, I would say that cybersecurity is not only about protecting systems, but also protecting the information that resides on those systems, and protecting and helping the people using those systems adopt the behaviors that will actually strengthen the whole architecture of the people, machines, and information working together.
All right, good. Thank you very much for that. One last question for both of you. A number of Canadian organizations have responsible disclosure policies, which offer financial incentives to what we call ethical hackers to refrain from publicly disclosing software security and vulnerabilities they discover in that organization's products or services until a patch is available. However, a frequent complaint of those who disclose security vulnerabilities under responsible disclosure scheme is that the organization that they disclose to fails to respect the rules of that game. Sometimes an organization that has been alerted to a security vulnerability in their product or services plays down the significance of that vulnerability so as to pay a smaller bounty, or fails to give due credit to the ethical hackers, or demands an unreasonable delay in public disclosure. They're unwilling to put resources into patching the vulnerability. So we all know that puts Canadians at risk. So what do you think government should be doing to encourage organizations to implement responsible disclosure policies to prevent this sort of activity from occurring?
Maybe the government could be offering tax deductions to cover those bounties. That would help. Maybe organizations take these bounties more seriously, or it could regulate this area of activity as well.
Mr. Hewitt?
I would say, Microsoft has quite a bit of extensive experience in this particular topic, and we'd certainly be happy to consult and inform some views, following this committee on that particular topic. We certainly encourage confidential vulnerability disclosure. We work with a community and have fostered a community with security researchers around the world. We have extensive bug bounty programs to try to direct that research into areas of our products and services that we feel require or are the most sensitive, or require maybe more, we'd like to see more inspection in those areas. And quite frankly, we found that works generally very well. There's certainly sometimes situations where technically these patches or updates to address these vulnerabilities take time. And when we are thinking about, we don't want to roll out a patch before it's ready and end up disrupting or negatively impacting existing infrastructure that exists out there.
Final 5 minutes to Mr. May and Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Huey, as somebody who's really new to this, I'm hoping you can maybe really dumb it down and walk me through this. But you talked about how much work goes into, from the Microsoft's perspective, into detecting these breaches and obviously stopping them. But can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the breach itself? Is it typically Microsoft that discovers this, opposed to the organization or a government?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would say the techniques that are being used most predominantly are twofold. One is attackers are using vulnerabilities or exploiting vulnerabilities in software that, for the most part, have been patched by the vendor, but the customer or organization or agency just hasn't yet had a chance to deploy that patch. The second,
but you see that first, right? Like, you guys are detecting these breaches maybe before a government, or even before the company in question.
So in the shared responsibility model we operate in for cloud services, where there's a security responsibility for both the cloud provider and for the actual end user or the customer, in the case where we see attacks against identities, meaning people are trying to access someone's username, their login and password, so to speak. Certainly, we've seen Russian actors use password spray and other types of techniques, including phishing, to gain access to those accounts. And so we work with those customers to be able to notify them of suspicious activity when we see those particular accounts being attempted to be compromised, or if we do have intelligence to detect that they have been compromised.
So what does that decision tree look like in terms of at what point do you reach out to the government and say, we've detected this should be something we should be sharing with the wider community?
In the vast majority of cases, because these systems are massive and at scale, the tooling has been empowered so that there are alerts that are generated that it's the responsibility of the end user, the end customer, to monitor those alerts and that suspicious activity themselves.
Thank you. The rest of my time to Mr. Fisher, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. May, for sharing your time with me. And I have to say, both witnesses are amazing. The information that we're getting here is absolutely astonishing, and I thank you both for being here. Short on time, I guess this would be sort of a short snapper here. Who has the edge, presuming that the skill set, the good guys and the bad guys are seeking the cyber-skilled young people of today and tomorrow? Who's got the edge? And is it a bidding war to get the smartest, brightest people out there to be on the side of good versus the side of evil? I just randomly looked at you, Cheryl. It was just...
I think the side of good pays better than the side of evil. So I would say there is an edge on the white hat hackers.
I would like to agree with Mr. Dupont in that regard. I think the area where there is an ethical line is in the security research community, right? Security researchers who are looking for vulnerabilities can do basically one of two things. They can provide that back to the vendor, which part of the confidential responsible vulnerability disclosure program, and have it fixed. Or they can sell that vulnerability to the cybercrime industry or others. And we try to provide bug bounty programs and other incentive structures to encourage and align those security researchers with the good guys.
Thank you for that. That sort of leads me to my last question, which I have about 45 seconds for. Mr. Hugh, you talked about the cost of data breach. Other than the selling of data, how do these state actors or these criminal networks profit other than the selling of the data?
They are unfortunately very creative in finding ways to monetize both data that's been stolen from organizations. In the case of ransomware, which I'm sure most people are familiar with that term, there's the traditional, I'll encrypt your files and then hold you for ransom, and with the intent that I'll give you a key to unencrypt those files. Then there's also the second stage where they would steal that data and then ransom, leaking that data out to the public as a sort of second stage ransom. Many organizations, and I think what we've seen in the last several years, is this professionalization of that crime industry, where it's not just one actor or two actors doing things, it's a whole economy of actors. And so another example is where compromised accounts, where a username and password for a particular Canadian organization is compromised. That gets put into a market on the dark web and sold for the highest bidder as a way to gain access to this particular organization, who may have more experience dealing with, say, critical infrastructure or the mining industry, right, and knows how to further monetize attacks against those organizations.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher, and that'll bring our questioning to an end. I want to thank Professor Dupont and Mr. Huey for this very enlightening and somewhat scary peek into the new world. I'll be sure not to talk to my wife in front of our refrigerator any longer. Yeah, we may have that. So with that, colleagues, assuming I live long enough, we will have another meeting. And next Wednesday, we'll conclude our final hour. And then in the second hour, our esteemed analysts will outline to us at least some chapters in a report. And if we could think about what we want to see in a report, that would be very helpful. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. And again, thank you, Professor DuPont and Mr. Huey. Very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.